Again, welcome. We're excited to have this opportunity to hear from Brother Vai Sikahema. I'm not saying it right. I'll never get it right. I can't say the name of this. Someday I'll eventually get it. I lived in Massachusetts for a year and a half before I could say the name of the town where I worked, which is Worcester, instead of Worcester. So, anyway, Vai, we're excited to have you here with us. Vai is and his wife, Kiala, and their daughter, Lana, are also here with us. Why don't we just have them stand for just a minute? We're really excited to have them here. Kiala is originally from here, graduated from Kahuku High School, so that's exciting. That's exciting. But she and Vai met at BYU Provo. It's another good BYU school, right? Through a friend, and I think went to a dance. Is that what I understand, right? Vai and Kiala are the parents of 4 children, and they also have one grandson that's 5 months old. So exciting. And they were actually here to be with some of their family. A couple of their sons have not seen each other because of missions. So kind of overlapping and finally getting together. So this is an ohana time for them, their family time. They were willing to come and be a speaker here with all of you today to share with this family, the family of BYU Hawaii. And so we're so grateful for that. Vai was the first Tongan to be in the NFL. He was drafted to play for the Cardinals, I guess it's St. Louis, Phoenix Cardinals now. Then went to play for Green Bay Packers before being with the Philadelphia Eagles. Vai, I actually went to BYU Provo myself, but heard of some of the things. I'm a little bit older, but did some amazing things. I think there was a particular run back with the SMU game that was just phenomenal. I think he came into everybody's attention with that, and he was a specialist in kickoff returns, and as a running back, I believe set an NCAA record for the most number of returns in 1985. So we're really excited. He's done a lot of wonderful sports things, been a great spokesman in many ways. He's serving now in a state presidency back in the Philadelphia area. He did what many, but not enough, sports people are able to. He was able to take that opportunity, and he's been a sports director for it's now the NBC affiliate in Philadelphia. So if you watch if you're ever in Philadelphia, turn it on and see Vai. So he's probably not too shy to be behind the microphone, although he may use a roving one today or the camera. We're really grateful to have him here and some of his family here with us today. Let's welcome Vai.
Thank you, Richard. How much time do I have?
You have about 45 minutes, and then questions and answers.
Okay, great. Am I tethered to this microphone, or can I walk around? I can walk around? You can hear me? It's on mute? Okay, Sarah's going to help me out. It's this one right here. Hey, that's better. Am I good? I'd rather walk around for one simple reason, because I got dressed today in my Tongan traditional. This is business casual. You know what makes it business casual? The aloha shirt. But I found in traveling, especially when we come to Hawaii, it's easier to pack what we call Tongans call tupenu. Samoans call it lava-lavas. But the Tongans add the mat. I'm telling you things, I'm preaching to the choir. It's like I'm talking to a group in Philadelphia that wouldn't know this. All of you know this. But the Tongans add the ta'avala as a sign and as a token of modesty for Tongans. But it's easier to pack this because the skirt you can just roll up and throw in the suitcase, as opposed to my sons who traveled with suits because we were going to be here on a Sunday, so they got to put it in a suit bag and all that. Anyway, it's just easier to do this. And then I'm so thrilled to be here. Let me my station sent a video clip, and they sent it yesterday. I've never seen it, but it's probably, I'm guessing it'll be 5 or 6 minutes long, and I'll show it to you here in a second. Let me just, some quick remarks about being back here in Laie. The first time I came to the States was to this place. My parents, when they immigrated to the States from Tonga, they left us with my maternal grandparents, and they came first to Laie. My mother came, the reason why they came, my mother had a scholarship to come here. She earned the scholarship graduating from Liahona High School in Tonga. My father, on the other hand, had no interest in school. In fact, if you ever see the movie Grease, you know the characters, Sandy and what was the boy's name? John Travolta. Danny? That was my parents. Okay, President Hafoka knows my parents, and so he's smiling back there. Because my father's a convert to the church. My mother grew up in the church, but they met at Liahona High School. They met there because my father was sent there after he had been kicked out of 2 government schools for fighting. My father was tough. But when he got there, he met one of the Howley couple missionaries, was a man named Chuck Woodworth, who was from Missouri, came to BYU Provo to get his education. In Missouri and in Provo, Chuck Woodworth was a fighter, a boxer, and had earned money for his education by fighting in local matches throughout Salt Lake, Ogden. He was a pretty good prize fighter. But then he left to go on a mission, same time that John Groberg left. In fact, he and John Groberg were roommates. And Chuck Woodworth he hadn't planned on going on a mission, but this is how small the church was back then. John Groberg goes on a mission, gets his call to Tonga, and because he left to go on a mission, his roommate, Chuck Woodworth, decides, that sounds like a pretty good place to go. I'm going to go turn in my papers so I can go to Tonga. And guess where he got his mission call? Nuku Alofa Tonga. So they ended up being there together. Then then they both come back. Chuck Woodworth returns, finishes his education, gets married. And in those days, maybe not so much now, but in those days, they used to hire young couples who were teachers to come to Liahona. And I'm sure they did it at Pesenga, Mapusanga in Samoa. They probably did it for a church college in New Zealand. But they hired these young couples to come back and they teach on 3-year contracts. So Chuck Woodworth and his wife are in Liahona teaching about the time that my father arrives there, having been kicked out of 2 government schools. It's his last chance for an education, and so his parents sent him to the private Mormon school. And while he's there, Chuck Woodworth, my suspicion is Chuck Woodworth sees my dad as someone who perhaps could be salvaged, but the only way to reach him would be to teach him how to fight properly, because my dad was just a street fighter. So Chuck Woodworth, who had been a champion fighter himself, pulls this young Tongan boy in under his wing, teaches him how to fight, but more importantly, he teaches him the gospel. And so my father joins the church, marries my mother. They stay in Liahona as dorm parents, and the children started coming. I'm the oldest of 3. My father is also the custodian of Liahona High School, where every Saturday he took me on his rounds and cleaned the buildings, but he took me first to the library, where he sat me in a room with a box full of magazines, Newsweek, Time Magazine, to babysit me while he made his rounds, and then he would come back and check on me. But I would sit there, of course I couldn't read, and I'd be fascinated with the pictures that I saw. I remember being fascinated by pictures of grapes. It seemed so exotic to me, grapes. Wondered what it tasted like. Apples. I wondered what apples tasted like. And to this day, I can't eat grapes or apples without thinking of the fascination I had as a child looking at these fruits that seemed odd to me and so exotic. It's a matter of perspective because, most people who live in the States look at papayas, which rotted on the ground in Tonga, and guava, which we had plenty of, as being so exotic. But for us in Tonga, I thought grapes and apples, wow. I wonder what they taste like. My parents immigrated here finally in 1969, left me and my younger siblings in Tonga. They came here like a lot of students in those days, and perhaps still now, not knowing how long it would take to earn enough money to send for us. But I think in their minds it wouldn't take that long because everyone sees America as the land of opportunity and everyone sees Americans as wealthy. But they didn't have any idea that it would take them a year to work. We lived in TVA when they were brand new, right? Some of you guys are grinning because I know TVA is like the ghetto now, right? I'm just kidding. If it became that, it's because of me. I'm telling you, we ran roughshod over TVA, those poor people. So they spent a year working in the show and working in the village to send for me. When I got to America, my father immediately started to train me to be a boxer. That was his plan and his goal all along. It's interesting that my parents never discussed why they came to America, but they had different reasons. My mother came because she wanted to gain an education, and my mother wanted to return to teach at Liahona. My father, on the other hand, had no intention of ever going back to Tonga. And my father, while he wasn't a great student, in fact, he was a terrible student, but he was wise. I'm sure you all understand the difference. My father was wise because he would read the newspapers and he paid attention to what was going on in America and what was happening in the United States in the 60s. Sorry? Civil rights movement was going on. So to my father, he didn't think that even for people of color, to get an education in his mind was a waste of time, because he was watching what was happening in America, and he figured even people of color with an education would never be able to reach the pinnacle of their education because of the civil rights movement. Now, of course, my father made some observations and he made some guesses. And I'll concede that while some of his ideas were off base, he did have some interesting theories that in time would turn out pretty good and pretty true to why he brought us. So he started training me to be his idea was that I would become the heavyweight champion of the world, primarily because while we lived in Tonga, he saw news clips of a young man from Louisville, Kentucky, who was 21 years old, had gone to the 1960 Olympics and won the gold medal as a light heavyweight, and then returned to the States, and within 3 years had won the heavyweight championship of the world. His name was Cassius Clay. I remember sitting in the library at Liahona one day, and I had the Life magazine unfolded to a cover photo of Muhammad Ali, who had just declared that he was Muslim, raising his hands this way. And on the ground was a fallen son he listed. Do you have a picture in your mind of what the photograph is? It's one of the most popular sports photographs in the world. And there was a caption underneath it, and my father said to me, I remember he walked in and he saw me looking at it, and he sat down and he explained to me what the photograph was about. And I'll never forget how he explained it to me. He said, son, that young black man won $100,000 for less than 3 minutes of work. It was after their second fight in Lewiston, Maine, and Muhammad Ali had knocked out Sonny Liston in the first round. And he told me, he said, son, that man earned $100,000 for less than 3 minutes of work. That's a lot more than most people earn in their lifetime. So when we get to America, this is what we're going to do. Now, the interesting thing is that $100,000 to me as a 5-year-old didn't mean any more than it did to my father, who was in his 20s, because it couldn't have meant that much to him. He had no idea what $100,000 was. You know, they bartered in fish and yams in Tonga, and he couldn't have possibly have known how much money that was. But he did have the concept down, that he had the idea that coming to America, that one of the ways to wealth in America was through athletics, because he felt like Americans, for whatever reason, they place great priority on sports and on athletics. So here we came to America. We lived in Ha'ula, and I went to school at La'i Elementary, right by the temple. And I would have been, had we stayed here, I know I would have been a great Red Raider. But here's what happened. My father moved us to the mainland. He persisted in begging my mother and insisting that my mother drop out of school. And I know it broke my mother's heart. But here was my mother's, here's what broke the straw that broke the camel's back for my mother was this. My father said to her, it took us a year working at the PCC to earn one-way passage for our son. It's going to take us another 2-3 years to earn passage for our younger 2 kids. Let's leave school, let's go to the mainland, and let's both work. And let's get our kids here. Sorry. I can't begin to imagine my mother's dilemma. Her dreams were within her grasp to gain an education and return us to Tonga. But yet she could see that if they stayed here and continued to go to school and work at the PCC, it would take another 2 or 3 years for her to see her children. So my mother relented, and they moved to Mesa, Arizona. They moved there because Chuck Woodworth had finished his contract in Tonga and had returned to the States, and Chuck Woodworth was living and teaching school in Tempe, Arizona. So my parents moved to Mesa so that Chuck Woodworth can continue to train me to be the heavyweight champion of the world. We didn't anticipate that the first presidency would scuttle our plans, because President N. Eldon Tanner, after we had arrived in Mesa, we were there for 6 months, President N. Eldon Tanner of the first presidency called Chuck Woodworth to be the mission president in Tonga. So Chuck Woodworth left us hanging, and he returned to Tonga to become the mission president, and my father and I pressed on. I was waking at 5 o'clock every morning. My father and I would run 5 miles, and then we would come back, shower, eat, go to school. I would come back in the evening, and then we would go to the gym for 2.5 hours. And then I'd come home in the evening and do my homework and go to sleep. We did this since I was 7. We started here in Laia. We used to run from Ha'ula to Laia and then back. How many miles would that be? 4 or 5? It seemed like 10 to me. We got to Arizona, we were training. When I was 14 years old, I won the welterweight championship for the state of Arizona, which is 147 pounds. That earned me the right to go to the Nationals, and that particular year happened to be an Olympic year. So the National Golden Gloves tournament served as a preliminary for the Olympics that year. So as a 14-year-old boy, I went to Omaha, Nebraska with my family to fight in the preliminaries for the Olympic tournament. I went there 147 pounds. It was a double elimination tournament, so you lose 2 fights and you're out. I won my first fight on Friday night, and then I had to fight Saturday morning and Saturday evening. I lost both of those fights. But we stayed to watch the rest of the tournament. The young man that won my weight class was just 18 years old. He was 4 years older than me, so he was 4 years senior to me. And he was a freshman at the University of Maryland, and he came from Potomac, Maryland. His name was Sugar Ray Leonard. I'm telling you, to this day, my father feels like that I threw those 2 fights on Saturday so that I didn't have to get in the ring with Sugar Ray Leonard. He would have killed me, but it was fun watching him fight. The other fighters in the tournament were the light heavyweight and heavyweight champions were brothers who came from East St. Louis, Missouri, and they were Marines, and they looked like they were in their 30s. Their names were Michael and Leon Spinks, those of you who follow boxing. And then there was a kid at 112 pounds from Tacoma, Washington, named Leo Randolph, who was just a great fighter. The best fighter in the group wasn't Sugar Ray. It was a 156-pounder from California. He was the super middleweight champion. His name was David Howard. And all of these guys won the gold medal in Montreal at the Olympics that summer. But as my father watched this thing unfold, he thought, we didn't have any idea that we were watching the greatest collection of amateur fighters that's ever been assembled by anybody. To this day, there's never been a greater collection of amateur fighters than the 1976 United States team. But my father watched this and he thought, it's okay, because Sugar Ray Leonard is going to turn pro after the Olympics, and then I would have 4 years to dominate the division. We would fight internationally, and I'd get international experience, and then we would go to the 1980 games, and I would be the representative for the United States. What he didn't count on was that I would start high school that fall. So I fought in the national tournament in the spring. When I got to high school in the fall, checked into school, and I walked around and I realized not one person in the school knew that I had fought in a national tournament in the spring. So completely under the radar, which is typical for most high schools. Kids don't know what you're doing, if you're not involved in school events. But I noticed that the cutest girls at our high school were walking around in the arms of these guys that played football. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but I decided I better go find out how to play football, because nobody here cares that I'm a champion fighter. So I go and volunteer to play football, and I'd never played football before. But the coach took one look at me. For 7 years, I had been running 5 miles every morning and been working out 2 hours, 2.5 hours every day except Sundays. So when I showed up to the gym with a bunch of other 14-year-olds, I looked like a man among boys. My body was developed, and I, had a little six-pack going, And I remember we'd line up and run sprints the first day, and I remember 2 kids started crying. And I thought, these guys are sissies. And this game, we're all padded up, we're wearing helmets. Nobody hit you in the face. I thought, this game is pretty cool, and it's pretty easy. And football did come easily to me. But my father wasn't convinced that this is what I was supposed to do. But my mother helped me to convince him that I should continue to play football. And we did fudge a little bit. I remember my mother telling him that football was part of the school curriculum. and that it was required. My father, not knowing any better, allowed me to go play football. But he started to change his mind when coaches started coming to our home, and we started receiving letters in the mail from colleges all over the country. Some of the first letters that came from places that we had never heard of, like Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Norman, Oklahoma, where University of Oklahoma is, and Michigan, University of Michigan, USC. John Robinson was the head coach at USC and came to our home. Frank Cush at Arizona State came to our home. The University of Hawaii coach, a guy named Dick Tomey, came to our home numerous times. I remember we didn't have furniture, so we just had mats. And I remember these coaches coming into our home and taking their shoes off and sitting, Tongan style, Indian style, on the floor. The head coach at Arizona State, Frank Cush, sat on our floor, and I'll never forget this conversation. My father asked him in broken English, Coach, what my son need to come to your school? And Frank Cush's answer is now legendary in family lore. He looked at my mother and father and said, a toothbrush. Now, initially my father didn't understand what he was saying, but my mother knew immediately. So they looked at each other, and the moment that I sat as a 17-year-old boy watching this transpire, and the moment my father realized he doesn't need one thing to get over to that school. He just needs to go show up there, and they're going to take care of everything. And I remember my father looked at my mother and said, oh, this is great country. This is great country. So my father started watching American football on television because his son's going to be playing, and he would be visiting these places. And he was fascinated that these coaches that he would see in the close-ups on the sidelines were coming to our home. It just fascinated him to see all of this happen, and he couldn't fathom the idea that to play an American sport, you would have everything paid for, have your education paid for, books, tuition, everything paid for. And if you played well enough, at the end of your 4 years in college, whether you graduated or not, you could go and play for money, and lots of it. So we tried to choose a school for me to go to, and I wanted to go to Arizona State because it was close to home. My father wanted me to go to Arizona State, but my mother, where do you think moms would want their LDS sons to go? My mom wanted me to go to BYU. But my mother didn't understand. She would cut out clippings of BYU and put it in our refrigerator. But she didn't understand. She just saw BYU. So I remember she would paste things up like BYU getting trounced, by University of Arizona. And she would cut it out and put it up on the refrigerator just because she saw BYU, not understanding that BYU was in the paper because they just got killed by somebody. I gave Arizona State a verbal commitment, and I ended up, but the Arizona head coach got fired right before the signing date happened, so I ended up going to my second choice, which was BYU. When I got to BYU, here's what happened. I went to a high school huge public high school in Mesa, Arizona, and they were dominant in two sports, wrestling and football. So here's what they did. The football coaches took my my class, I never registered for any of my own classes. What they did was they took my class, my registration, and they registered me for classes. They put me in all the classes that I needed to, that were required for graduation. But they put me in classes that were taught by assistant coaches. So my history teacher, my Arizona history teacher, Lester Bradley, was the offensive line coach. The baseball coach was my math teacher. On and on. All of my assistant coaches were my teachers. And I didn't realize this until I got to BYU, but the reason they did that was to make sure that I would be eligible to play on Friday nights. Could you imagine that? The moment that I sat down in a classroom like this at Brigham Young University in the Joseph Smith building with 500 kids for American Heritage. Have any of you taken American Heritage? It's no joke, right? Especially if your American history teacher in high school was your coach and he didn't really care whether you read the assignments or not. So when I sat there at BYU and I looked around and they were talking about the Revolutionary War, and they were talking about the three phases of government, the executive branch, the legislative. I had no idea what they were talking about. Had no idea. I went to Physical Science 101, and the teacher said, flip to chapter 10. And I thought, okay, well, he's going to bounce us around. I get to chapter 10, and he says, we're going to start here because you should already know 1 through 9. And I kept a finger at chapter 10, but the other hand I used to flip through 1 through 9. I had no idea what 1 through 9 was. But I was at BYU nonetheless. So I realized what a great disservice that those teachers and those coaches gave me by having me skate through high school that way. And I struggled through college. And it took me, I'm embarrassed to say this, but it took me 22 years to graduate from BYU. I entered 1980, and I graduated almost 10 years ago, 2002. I went back and got my degree, but I worked on it all those years. Thank you. All the while, the one class in which that I really excelled in because I was forced to was English, for one simple reason. The chair of the English department at my high school was a woman named Barbara Nielsen. And Barbara Nielsen happened to be my mother's visiting teacher. And she knew what those coaches were doing. So she insisted that the one thing that she could do was to put me in her English class. So while there were assistant coaches who taught English, she demanded that I was in her English class. And by my junior year, she insisted that I try out for a position as a reporter in her journalism class. She was the faculty advisor for the school newspaper. And that woman came to my home every week and helped me with my English because it's my second language. She helped me write and rewrite drafts. She had me go cover some of the minor sports, so-called minor sports in high school, which turned out to be fun because I was going to cover girls volleyball and girls swimming. Really liked those sports. And she had me interview people. And that turned out to be the saving grace in my life, because I owe my career in journalism to a woman who was my mother's visiting teacher, who insisted that I take her classes. So when I finished at BYU, I got drafted into the NFL. When I got into the NFL, we played in St. Louis, and then the team moved to Phoenix, and then we got traded to the Green Bay Packers. And all along the way, I decided, I sort of figured out, I need to go do television because I could probably do that. It seems easier than writing. And I can probably transition into that career much faster after my football career. So that's what I did. And at the end of my football career, I was hired by the NBC station in Philadelphia to be their weekend sports anchor. And after a year and a half, they promoted me to become the sports director, which simply means it was my department. I got to run it. I got to hire and fire people in my department. I've never fired anybody. People have left when they've gotten better jobs. But then a few years ago, I've always had this nagging, I love to write, but if I could have made a living writing, I would have done that, because it's just something I love to do. So I guess it was about a year ago, the Desert News contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to write a blog for them. So I said I would love to write a blog, but they didn't know that I could write. I said, I'd love to write a blog for you. So I started writing, and pretty soon they decided they would make me a columnist. Now, I don't know, I don't get paid anymore for being a columnist and being a blogger, but they made me a columnist a few months ago. If you're interested, go to Desert News, desnews.com, and go look at some of the things I've written. Along the way, I've always had this sense that I was supposed to do great things. And I've always had the sense, this inner feeling that I could make a difference wherever I lived. If my mother had it her way, we would have returned to Tonga, and I'm sure we would have done just fine in Tonga. But I want you as students, where you come from. My suspicion is that most of you are coming from countries where you're either the first in your families, or maybe your parents were fortunate to have college educations. But I feel like, and I've always felt this way about BYU Hawaii, that you're pioneers, that you're really pioneers by being here and finishing your education and returning to where you come from, whether you stay in the United States or go back to Asia or back to Polynesia, that you're pioneers in what you're doing. So treat your education that way, and see yourself as being a pioneer, because by and large you will be. You will be. The church needs you to be pioneers. And this place has a legacy that's unique. And it's a special place. Even those of us who live back east and come here, we feel the legacy that's in this place. I drive by here and I see the little apartment where we lived in 1970, 71. And I think to myself, my parents had no idea, neither did I, that I would get to go and go to BYU, Provo to play football, and play on a national championship team while I was there. We never knew when we lived in TVA. We used to go to Hukilau Beach to barbecue. Never expected that I would get to play in the National Football League and play in some of the palaces in the NFL. Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin is like Yankee Stadium in baseball. It's a palace, and I got to play there. We played in some of the great cities, some of the great places in America. And it didn't end there. We would be able to parlay that opportunity into a television career in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Can you imagine that? I'm telling you that even today, 2011, I've been there for 18 years at that station. I pinch myself every day that a Tongan is a sports director and a sports anchor in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is the 4th largest television market in the entire country. It's a huge market. There's over 6 million people that live in the metropolitan area of Philadelphia. They're about to dedicate, the groundbreaking for the Philadelphia Temple is about to happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And President Eyring is coming to preside at it. It's a historic place. And every night, the announcer at our station introduces me to a television audience of 6 million people. Vai Sikahema with your sports. When I hear it, I'm telling you, I think about my parents and I think about my upbringing. Because in another generation, a generation or two before, that would have never happened. I have Jewish colleagues at my television station who have been there much longer, who changed their names because it was too ethnic. They changed their name from Goldberg, which is very Jewish, and just made it Gold. You know, people did that with their names. Yet a generation or two later, somebody like Vai Sikahema can be doing sports in that city. Now, the wonderful thing is that, you know what, people in Philadelphia, they're not always sure. They know I'm from Tonga, but they're not always sure whether I'm black, whether I'm Puerto Rican, Hispanic. They're not sure. So when they ask me, I just tell them, I'm whatever you want me to be, brother. You want me to be black? I'm black. Just watch. You know what? Why don't we play? Can we play this, Sarah? And then we'll take a couple of questions. Is that okay?
This may look like a business person special. Actually, these are the missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Philadelphia Mission, it is Mormon night, which is part of the reason why I'm here tonight. They're singing the national anthem tonight. But let's talk about the Eagles and the situation they got on their hands. They just turned up the heat a little bit. Terrell Owens today they sent a formal letter to Owens at his home in Atlanta, basically telling him that when he comes back to camp on Wednesday, they're going to expect him to be at his best behavior and, in fact, have a change of attitude. This is basically what I reported on Friday when I said that I had met with and spoken to a member of the team's brass who told me the same thing, and now they've just followed up in person and in kind. More on this, let's go to John Parker standing by in Pittsburgh with the team. Hey, John.
Today, we thought we'd be able to get away from it for 195. Reno Mahe will start, and I'm sure you're going to be watching him closely. He's your cousin or nephew?
It's something. If he plays for something, it'll be my son tonight, John. Penguins today signed John LeClaire to a 2-year deal. Speaking of the Flyers, his former team, they introduced today Peter Forsberg, their newest star center. Got a 2-year contract.
I told the missionaries just to keep singing.
By 2 strokes. That's your sports. I'm Vai Sikahema for NBC 10. And thank you very much, missionaries from the Philadelphia Mission. We'll have much more. The later that time at 11 o'clock. Back to you guys in studio.
I think there's another clip.
The Olympics officially start tonight on NBC 10. You know, one of the smallest delegations of athletes at the Olympic Games comes from the tiny South Pacific nation of Tonga. They have only 3 athletes in Sydney going for the gold. Now, you can find Tonga on the far right-hand side of this map. 2,000 miles east of Sydney, Australia. Nearly 100,000 people live on this tiny island, and Tonga is also the native homeland for our own Vai Sikahema. It was just last May that Vai officially became a U.S. citizen. At the age of 7, Vai and his family moved from Tonga to Hawaii and then to the mainland Arizona. Tonga might be small in Olympic stature, but it has a big place in Vai and his family's hearts. And Vai is live now from Sydney, Australia. Vai, viva la Tonga!
Hey, Tim, I got a little emotional there as you were reading all that. Listen, this is such a wonderful thing here. Tonga named me the Olympic team because I was the first Tongan to play in the NFL. And they credentialed me to march, but I could not activate that credential because it would have deactivated my media credential. There are so many restrictions here, we can't even show you the flame behind me. But we can show you what the Tongans will be wearing tonight.
The 48 regular.
48 regular.
Right.
We're 44, Hugo. Hugo Okuli is the Sydney Taylor hired to outfit the Tongan team.
That's the one.
And the official outfit for opening ceremonies are these candy apple red blazers.
I hope they like it because when we try to please everybody, we make sure everyone likes it.
I think it's awesome. It's great. They did a good job there.
You like the colors?
Yes.
These tracksuits, which were worn for a flag ceremony in the Olympic Village. Ceremonies, I was allowed one moment of glory. All right, Tony's now to make a statement. I want to check out this bright red blazer they'll march in with tonight. Then pan down here. This is a mat cummerbund that they wear and a skirt. How about this? All of this is issued by the Tongan Olympic Committee. This is the ultimate souvenir. I'll be bringing this back, although my wife may not like it because she has this very same skirt. All right. Sydney. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks for that great skirt.
Nothing worse than showing up in the same skirt that your wife has.
Former NFL return man Vai Sikahema has agreed to fight Jose Canseco, your boy. Be honest.
Yeah.
You're curious to see this fight, aren't you?
You don't have to twist my arm on this one. I do want to see this fight. Vai Sikahema is like 5'9" and 180. Jose Canseco is like 6'3" and 230. He's a beast. He's a gun. But Vai Sikahema, I'll bet you, because he's a return guy, I'll bet you he's a better boxer than Canseco. I'll bet you he can win. I'll bet you.
Because I've been on the same side of the same window, because I bet that Vai Sikahema would beat Jose Canseco's brains out. Okay? Leaving him stretched out looking for his mouthpiece like Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson. Because Vai Sikahema is a football player.
Tough guy.
Jose Canseco, we don't need some tough guys. He's huge, so what? Sikahema would knock his turtle out.
It is time for top plays. Number 10, celebrity boxing. Vai Sikahema. Battling Jose Canseco. Revenge Sikahema. Oh my goodness.
Making his personal goal.
He's the smaller guy, right? Yes. But apparently much better boxer.
Jose Canseco, what a transition. He has been so many things to so many people. Steroid user, and then, however, reluctantly steroid whistleblower. Madonna arm candy before it was fashionable, and then, yes, able to be downloaded. Twice an author of books that to be safely will never rest alongside Milton and Chaucer's In the Canon. Once even a ball player, and now a celebrity boxer. Taking out Vai Sikahema in a celebrity match in Atlantic City. He said coming in, he had incredible knockout power. And well, somebody did. It just turns out it was Sikahema. So for now, Jose Canseco, good night.
All right, watch the Tongans. All right, you can turn that off, Sarah. My wife thought I was crazy. Canseco had come to Philadelphia looking for an opponent to fight, for him to earn money. But I accepted it because I used to do it when I was a kid. And he didn't know that I used to do that, but I told him. I used to fight when I was a kid. I was pretty good. He goes, well, when? I said, when I was 14. He goes, oh, a long time ago. I gave the proceeds of my earnings to charity, but my wife thought I was crazy. Now, my wife doesn't know that I used to. She knew I used to fight, but she didn't know that I used to do this seriously. But it was just a fun thing to be able to do back east. And it's what, we do as Tongans. We're just crazy. You guys know that, right? Tongans and Samoans, we're crazy. Anyways, let me just leave you with this. And it doesn't look like we're going to get to ask questions. Do the best you can. Just do the best you can. If you struggle in school, and if it takes you 22 years to graduate like it did for me, don't take 22 years. Take less than that. And just make it 10 if you struggle in school. But just plug away at it. Just work at it. Because I know this. I've learned this about my life. That even in the things in which I struggled, academics, when I did the right things, and I always tried to do the right things, the Lord guided me. And He directed my path. And He brought people along like Barbara Nielsen, who gave me hope and who taught me. And I listened. And He brought me church leaders that helped guide and direct me. And He put me in places where I could do the most good. So do that. Whatever it is that you struggle in, do your best. Do your best and seek and petition the Lord to guide you and direct you. And whatever it is that you're weak in, He'll make the weak things become strong. And He'll strengthen you, He'll guide your way. Because God wants you to make a difference in your families, in your communities, in your countries. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll all be writing great remarks, those of you that are in the class, but thank you once again. Thank you.
Mahalo.
Thank you. Wow, what a wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was so fun.
That must have been pretty fun hitting Jose, right?
I have to admit it was.
That was, bringing some of that back. Right. Show him who's boss, man. That's great. That's fantastic. When was that held?
It was a couple years ago, a couple summers ago.
So he had kind of come and